The millionaire smirked when he saw her, his ex-wife in a faded dress, clutching her purse like it was all she owned. Guests chuckled, but seconds later the laughter died, and every eye turned in shock. What she revealed would destroy his empire. If you believe secrets never stay buried, comment "Truth always wins" below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because this story will leave you questioning every marriage you thought you understood. The ballroom shimmered like a cathedral built from diamonds. Crystal chandeliers rained light across polished marble floors, and 1,000 whispered conversations blended into the delicate hum of violins. Waiters glided through the crowd, balancing champagne flutes that reflected the room's golden glow. At the center of it all stood Adrian Locke, the man everyone wanted to see, the man everyone wanted to be. Tonight was his victory, his engagement party. He raised a glass, his tailored tuxedo catching the light. "To love that lasts," he said, smiling with that trademark charm that had once landed him on the covers of magazines. The crowd erupted in applause, their laughter bouncing off mirrored walls. He stood tall, basking in the praise, every gesture calculated. Adrian had built his empire on this. Spectacle, dominance, the illusion of perfection. But in the corners of the room, whispers carried a different tune. "Didn't he used to be married?" One guest murmured, fanning herself with the party's gold-edged invitation. "Yes, Clara. What happened to her?" Another asked, careful to keep her voice low. "No one talks about it." "Not here." The words fluttered, then vanished under another wave of applause. Adrian didn't flinch. If he heard them, he didn't show it. He had learned long ago how to silence the past, by burying it under enough champagne and success that no one dared to question him. Tonight was proof that he had won. His new fiancée, Vanessa, glittered at his side in a gown the color of midnight, diamonds cascading down her wrist. She leaned into him as if the world belonged only to them. "Smile wider," she whispered in his ear. "This is history in the making." He smirked, adjusting his cufflinks. History was exactly what he wanted people to forget. Then the doors opened. At first, no one noticed. A gust of cold night air brushed into the room, ruffling the candles on each table. Slowly, heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Even the violins seemed to falter. A woman stood in the doorway. Her dress was plain, the kind one bought from clearance racks, its faded fabric stark against the sequined gowns around her. Her hair was tied back without effort, her shoes scuffed from years of wear. She carried no clutch, no jewelry, only a small leather purse. Held tight against her chest, Clara. For a moment, the entire ballroom seemed to breathe as one, recognition rippling through the guests. Adrian's glass froze halfway to his lips. His jaw tightened, though he forced a laugh that came too late, too loud. "Well, well," he said, voice echoing across the silence. "Did someone get lost on the way to the charity gala?" Laughter erupted, brittle and awkward, bouncing from guest to guest as though they weren't sure if they were allowed to join. Vanessa's smile faltered, her grip on Adrian's arm stiffening, but Clara didn't move. She didn't flinch. She stood in the doorway, her eyes fixed on him, unblinking, steady. Not rage, not desperation, but resolve. She took one step forward. The marble floor echoed under her worn heels. Another step. The laughter died again, replaced by the quiet shifting of guests too uncomfortable to meet her gaze. Adrian set his glass down. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low this time, edged with warning. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Not yet. She wasn't here to shout. She wasn't here to beg. She was here to end the silence. And as she walked deeper into the ballroom, through chandeliers and champagne and people who once pitied her, Adrian Locke, millionaire, fiancé, untouchable, felt the first crack splinter through his glass kingdom. Clara's fingers trembled against the worn strap of her purse as she stepped further into the ballroom. Each heel click echoed louder than the violins, louder than the whispers that circled like smoke around her. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, some wide with shock, others narrowed with cruel delight. Once she had walked into rooms like this with her head high, her gown custom-tailored, her arm linked with Adrian's. Once, people had whispered her name in admiration, not pity. But tonight, the silk had been replaced by faded cotton, and the only jewelry she wore was the thin gold band she had never managed to sell. Adrian's voice cut through the tension. "Well," he said, raising his glass again, If it isn't the ghost of Christmas past. The room tittered with hesitant laughter, relieved to follow his lead. Tell me, Clara, did you take a wrong turn on the way to the servants' entrance? Her chest tightened. Every word was a blade, every laugh a twist. She forced herself to keep walking, past the tables laden with crystal decanters, past the women draped in diamonds, who clutched their pearls tighter, as though her poverty might be contagious. She could still recall the weight of those jewels on her own wrist years ago. Gifts from Adrian meant more to be displayed than cherished. Her breath caught as her gaze locked on the grand chandelier above. She remembered when it had been installed. She had stood there smiling, pretending the cost didn't make her sick. She had believed him when he said, "This is our kingdom, Clara." Ours now it felt like a monument to her erasure. "Clara?" Adrian's tone carried mock concern. "You look pale. Surely you didn't come here expecting an invitation? Or are you just here to remind us that not all fairy tales end well?" The laughter that followed was sharper this time, emboldened. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Her eyes scanned the crowd, searching maybe for even one familiar face who would meet her gaze without cruelty. But those who once dined at her table now looked away, studying their glasses as though they'd never known her. This is what silence bought me, she thought. Years of keeping her mouth shut while Adrian lied, cheated and shifted everything into his name. Years of enduring his temper behind closed doors, believing that if she endured long enough she would keep her dignity. Instead, she had lost everything, the house, the friends, the future she thought was hers. Her hand tightened around the purse. Inside it was her last weapon, but this wasn't the moment, not yet. Tonight had to build brick by brick, until even Adrian's arrogance cracked. "Adrian," she said finally, her voice low but steady. It carried further than she expected, landing in the silence like a dropped stone. "You haven't changed." He tilted his head, feigning pity. "And you haven't improved." The crowd chuckled. Vanessa slid closer to his side, her smile polished but her eyes sharp, studying Clara the way one might study a stranger who'd wandered in from the street. Clara's cheeks burned, but she lifted her chin. She had promised herself she wouldn't let him see her break. Not this time. A memory surfaced, the night she left, clutching a suitcase and nothing else. His voice had chased her down the marble steps. "You'll have nothing without me," nothing, she had believed him. For years she had lived in the shadow of that curse. But as she stood here now among the glitter and the sneers, she realized the truth. He had always been wrong. Her hands might be empty, but her resolve was not. And though Adrian's laughter filled the hall again, louder, brighter, meant to remind everyone of his power, Clara let a small quiet smile touch her lips. Because for the first time in years, she knew something he didn't. Clara's smile in the ballroom was steady, but inside, memories pressed against her chest like shards of glass. Every sneer, every forced laugh from the guests tonight pulled her back into a past she had once called a life. The chandeliers above blurred for a moment, and in her mind, the room dissolved into another evening years ago when she had first fallen for Adrian Locke. He had been magnetic then, charismatic in a way that made people lean closer without realizing. Their first date wasn't in a five-star restaurant or some velvet-lined lounge. It had been in a small cafe on the edge of the city. He wore no tuxedo, only a crisp shirt and that crooked grin that promised the world. "You deserve everything," he had told her, sliding a coffee across the table. "And I'm going to give it to you." She had believed him. How could she not? His words carried conviction, and his eyes sparkled with ambition. When they married, Clara thought she had found her partner, someone who shared not only dreams but burdens. She gave herself to the marriage fully, never keeping secrets, never doubting his word. For a time it had been bliss. Parties where they were the center of attention, nights filled with whispered promises, mornings where she woke to roses on the pillow. Clara had loved him without reservation, and she had thought he loved her back, but shadows creep in slowly. It began with small things. His phone always faced down on the table. His late nights explained with vague business meetings, a new account she hadn't known about, brushed aside with a charming laugh. "Don't trouble yourself with finances," he had told her once, cupping her chin in his hand. "You're too good for numbers. Leave that to me." She had smiled then, grateful for his reassurance, not realizing he was quietly pulling every thread of independence from her hands. The manipulation was always wrapped in silk. When she wanted to visit her mother, he would sigh. "Of course you can, Clara, but..." Wouldn't it look bad if you left me alone during such an important week? People might think we're struggling. When she caught the faint trace of perfume on his suit, he had laughed and kissed her forehead. Vanessa hugged me at the office. She's like family, you know that. And when her instincts screamed, when her heart trembled at the thought of betrayal, he turned the blame inward. You're overthinking. You've always been too sensitive. That word had become his weapon. Sensitive, emotional, irrational. He used it to disarm her, to make her doubt the very instincts that might have saved her sooner. The flashbacks tightened, images weaving together like a cruel reel. She remembered the night she had found the first receipt. A diamond bracelet purchased abroad. Not for her. She had waited up, the bracelet receipt trembling in her hand, the clock striking 2 when Adrian walked in. "What is this?" she whispered. He didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled as though she had asked about the weather. "It's a gift for a client's wife. It helps me close deals. You should be proud of me, Clara, proud that I'm providing for us." And though every bone in her body told her it was a lie, she nodded, swallowing her doubts. Because what else could she do? She had no access to their accounts, no claim to their assets. Everything she had was in his name. Gradually her life shrank. She stopped questioning. She stopped resisting. Every argument ended with her silence. Her pride chipped away piece by piece until all that remained was obedience. He trained me to disappear, she thought now, standing in the glittering ballroom of his new empire. And I let him. But the memory that cut deepest was the last one. The night she left, she had begged him for truth one final time. "Just tell me," she said, voice breaking. "Is there someone else?" He looked at her for a long moment, then smirked. "Does it matter?" "You'll never survive without me." The words echoed now, louder than the orchestra, louder than the whispers in the ballroom. She could still see him standing at the top of the stairs, unbothered as she carried a suitcase into the night. And yet, as her gaze fixed on him across the room, Adrian radiant in his tuxedo, the king of glass walls, Clara felt something new stir within her. Resolve. He had been wrong, she had survived. And tonight she wasn't here to beg or to explain or to cry. She was here to pull those shadows out into the light. Her fingers brushed against her purse. Inside it lay the truth, and as Adrian turned away to clink glasses with Vanessa, Clara's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Because soon he wouldn't be laughing. The laughter rolled back into the ballroom, thin and brittle, as Adrian moved on to another toast. He wanted the attention back on him. The spotlight returned. The audience reminded that Clara was nothing more than a ghost, trespassing on his night of triumph. But Clara wasn't listening to his words anymore. Something else had caught her eye. At the far end of the room, past the shimmer of crystal tables and polished shoes, a young woman stood apart from the crowd. She was too still, too quiet, her hands clasped in front of her, as though anchoring herself against the tide of extravagance around her. Unlike the other guests, she didn't pretend to laugh at Adrian's mockery. She didn't whisper into the ear of the man beside her. She only watched, and she watched Clara. Clara's breath stilled. The girl couldn't have been older than her mid-20s. Her dress was elegant, though understated compared to the dripping sequins of the women who surrounded Adrian. Her dark hair fell loose against her shoulders, and her eyes, pare-wide, sharp, unblinking, stayed locked on Clara as if waiting for something. A strange recognition prickled along Clara's skin. Though she couldn't place it, Adrian meanwhile basked again in his own glow. Now, where were we? Ah yes, to new beginnings, to a love pure enough to erase the mistakes of the past. He lifted Vanessa's hand and kissed it, his lips curling into a smile that dared Clara to break. Clara's fists tightened at her sides, but her gaze slid back to the young woman. She hadn't moved. Only her expression shifted ever so slightly when Adrian spoke, the faintest shadow passing across her face like a storm cloud drifting over sun. She knows, Clara thought suddenly. The realization pressed heavy against her ribs. That look wasn't curiosity. It was recognition, disappointment, maybe even pain. The orchestra struck up another piece, violins sweeping across the room, but Clara heard none of it. She took a cautious step toward the edge of the crowd, eyes never leaving the young woman. As she did, the girl turned, just a fraction, enough for Clara to notice the way her jaw tightened when Adrian laughed again, enough for Clara to see the quick glance, sharp and cold, cast toward Vanessa. This wasn't a stranger. She wasn't here by accident. Clara's pulse quickened. Clara. Adrian's voice snapped through the air like a whip. She turned, startled, to find him smirking at her from across the room. "You're not leaving us already, are you? You've hardly had a chance to congratulate me." The crowd chuckled, eager to follow his lead. Clara forced her face still, though her stomach twisted. If she looked away from him too quickly, if she let him see her searching the corners of the room, he'd know she had noticed something. And Adrian never allowed what he couldn't control. She pressed her purse closer to her chest and gave a small shake of her head. "Not yet," she murmured. But her thoughts were no longer on him. They were on the young woman in the shadows who now slipped quietly toward the side exit. Clara's heart jolted. Every instinct screamed that she should follow, that this woman held a piece of the truth Adrian had buried for years. Yet hesitation rooted her in place. What if she was wrong? What if chasing after her only gave Adrian more ammunition to humiliate her in front of everyone? Her nails dug into the worn leather strap of her purse. No, she thought, the faintest spark of defiance burning in her chest. She wasn't watching him. She was watching me. And people don't stare like that without reason. By the time Clara wove through the crowd toward the door, the young woman was gone. All that remained was the lingering weight of her stare, heavy with secrets. And as Clara turned back, Adrian's smile found her again, sharp, calculating, too knowing. For the first time that night, Clara wondered if he had seen the girl too. Clara's palm pressed against the worn leather of her purse, as if it were a lifeline. She could still feel the imprint of the envelope inside, its edges sharp against her skin. It was small, ordinary-looking, but inside was the kind of truth that could end Adrian Locke's empire in a single night. Her breath slowed, and her eyes swept the ballroom. Everywhere she looked, the signs of his wealth gleamed. Golden candle holders, champagne bubbling in crystal flutes, men in tuxedos trading smiles, women in gowns that shimmered like water under light. Adrian had turned life into theater, and tonight he played the king. But in her purse lay the script he never wanted read. Her mind drifted back to the day she found it. She had been living in the small, crumbling apartment where the ceiling leaked in winter, and neighbors fought through paper-thin walls. Survival had left no room for pride. She was sorting through a box of old papers, scraps of a life she once thought permanent, when her hand landed on the envelope. Inside were documents she had nearly forgotten existed. Signed transfers bearing Adrian's unmistakable signature. Records of offshore accounts in the Caymans, millions funneled under shell corporations, funds drained from charities he claimed to support. And tucked at the back a handwritten note, Adrian's own words, arrogant in their carelessness. "Keep this quiet until the merger is through. Then no one will trace it back to me." Her throat had closed reading it. Proof, not suspicion, not instinct, proof. Now standing in his glittering kingdom, Clara clutched that same envelope. She could feel its weight even through the thin leather of her purse. Adrian's laughter boomed across the room as he wrapped an arm around Vanessa's waist, pulling her closer for the cameras flashing at their table. The sight twisted Clara's stomach, not with jealousy but with fury. He had always been skilled at distraction, flaunting one thing so no one looked at what mattered. Her knuckles whitened as her grip tightened. For years he had taken everything from her, and now the power to destroy him was in her hands. But timing was everything. If she exposed him too soon, in front of all these people, he would spin it. Adrian could make truth sound like slander, could paint her as the bitter ex-wife, desperate for attention. She had seen him do it before, turning allies against her with a single charm-laced sentence. Not yet, she told herself. Wait, let the cracks show first. Then strike. Still carrying that old bag? Adrian's voice cut through her thoughts. He had noticed the way she held it close. His smirk deepened. Funny. You always had a taste for expensive things, Clara. Looks like your standards have slipped. A ripple of laughter spread through the guests. Vanessa pressed her fingers to her lips, pretending politeness but unable to hide the amusement in her eyes. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she didn't let go of the purse. She lifted her chin and met Adrian's gaze directly. Some things are worth holding on to, she said softly. The crowd heard it as weakness. Adrian heard it as defeat. But inside, Clara knew it was a promise. Her thumb brushed the flap of the purse. Just that slight movement steadied her, because the truth was no longer only memory. It was paper, ink signatures. It was undeniable, and she would not leave tonight without using it. Still, as her eyes scanned the room, searching again for the mysterious young woman who had vanished moments before, a new unease crept in. If Anna knew something? If she carried a piece of Adrian's truth too? Then Clara wasn't the only one who could shatter him. She turned back to Adrian, who was raising another glass. His grin glistened under the chandelier light. To the crowd it looked unshakable. To Clara it looked like glass about to break. Her hand pressed harder against the envelope, and in that moment she realized she wasn't just holding evidence. She was holding the fuse to his downfall. The only question was when and how to light it. The violins swelled again, but the music felt hollow. A thin veil stretched over the tension that now hummed in every corner of the ballroom. Guests whispered behind crystal rims, darting glances between Adrian Locke and the woman who refused to vanish. Clara stood near the center, her purse clutched close. Her heart pounded so hard it rattled against her ribs, but her eyes stayed fixed on Adrian. He wanted her to crumble. He wanted this to end in pity. Not tonight. Adrian raised his glass higher, the spotlight catching the rim. "It's a shame, isn't it?" he said, his voice dripping amusement. "Some people never learn when their time is over. Clara dear, you've had your turn. Don't embarrass yourself any further." The crowd chuckled obediently, though unease flickered across faces. Laughter that wanted permission. Clara's throat tightened. She had swallowed his insults before. She had endured them behind closed doors, when no one else was there to see the way he cut her down. But not here. Not in front of them. Her fingers slipped inside her purse. The paper edges pressed against her skin like a blade. For one fragile second she hesitated. If she revealed it now, she couldn't take it back. Then Adrian smirked again. That smirk. The one that had haunted her for years. The one he wore when he knew he had won. She pulled the envelope free. The air shifted. The laughter dimmed. Every head turned as the plain white envelope emerged from her hand, an object so ordinary it became dangerous. Adrian's smile faltered for the briefest flicker, then returned sharper, crueler. "What's this?" he asked, tilting his head like a teacher humoring a slow student. Clara's voice trembled, but the words were clear. "You took everything from me. My home, my life, my dignity." She lifted the envelope slightly, letting the chandelier light skim its surface. "But you left behind the truth." Gasps rippled. Vanessa's hand froze mid-reach for her wineglass. Adrian's laugh came quick, loud, too rehearsed. "My God, Clara, is this really the stunt you came here for? Waving scraps of paper like they mean something. You always did love drama." He moved closer, slow and deliberate, as though approaching a child with a dangerous toy. "Hand it over before you embarrass yourself further." "No." Her voice cracked, then steadied. She gripped the envelope tighter, knuckles pale. "Not this time." Around them, guests leaned forward, caught between horror and fascination. The orchestra had stopped entirely. The silence was louder than music. "You see," Clara continued, her voice low but slicing through the quiet, "while you were busy parading around, building this empire, you forgot one thing. Paper trails don't burn." Adrian's jaw flexed. A shadow crossed his face, too quick for most to notice, but Clara saw it. The flicker of recognition, of danger. He laughed again, but the sound was strained. "You think anyone here will believe you? After the mess you made of your own life? Look at you, Clara. You can barely afford the dress on your back." She met his eyes without flinching. "They don't have to believe me. They just have to see what's inside." She lifted the flap. The motion was small, but the room recoiled as though she had drawn a weapon. Adrian's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with practiced charm, disguised as concern. "Don't!" he hissed, the smile still plastered on his lips for the audience. Pain shot up Clara's arm, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, close enough that only he could hear. "For years you told me I was nothing without you. But tonight, Adrian, you're nothing without your lies." His grip loosened just enough for her to tear her wrist free. The room held its breath. Adrian's smirk remained, but Clara saw it now for what it was, glass. And glass always cracks. She slid the envelope fully open, and in that moment, every guest leaned forward, waiting, bracing, about to see what Adrian had spent his life burying. For a beat, the entire ballroom seemed frozen. Clara with the envelope clutched like a weapon, Adrian with his hand half extended, as though he could still stop her. The crowd caught between horror and curiosity. Then, a soft laugh broke the silence. It came from Vanessa. She rose gracefully from her seat, every inch the polished fiancée in a midnight gown that glimmered under the chandelier. Her smile was calm, practiced, the kind that belonged on glossy magazine covers. Sliding her arm through Adrian's, she leaned into him, her chin lifting just enough to look down at Clara. My, Vanessa said smoothly. What a scene you've made. Adrian, darling, surely you don't need to indulge this. Performance? Her voice was silk, but Clara caught the edge beneath it. This wasn't just elegance. It was strategy. Adrian exhaled with exaggerated relief, playing along. You're right, Vanessa. She thrives on attention. Always did. Laughter flickered again through the room, but it was thinner now, hesitant. The envelope was still there. The threat still hung in the air. Clara's eyes narrowed. She had watched women like Vanessa orbit Adrian for years, first as whispers, then as shadows, then finally as replacements. The fiancée was flawless, but there was something brittle in the way she held herself, something that made Clara press her advantage. You should be careful, Clara said softly, but loud enough to carry. You're not the only one he promised forever to. The words landed like glass shattering on marble. Vanessa's smile stiffened, though she didn't let it drop. She tilted her head, studying Clara as if she were an insect pinned under glass. Is that supposed to scare me? Clara didn't answer. Instead, she let her silence do the work, her gaze flicking deliberately between Adrian and Vanessa. The crowd stirred. Murmurs swelled like a wave. Women leaned closer to their husbands. Men shifted uncomfortably, as though reminded of secrets best kept. Eyes darted, not toward Clara this time, but toward Adrian and the woman on his arm. Vanessa's grip on Adrian's sleeve tightened. He didn't notice. He was too busy smirking, trying to drown the tension with bravado. Don't listen to her, he said quickly, his tone brighter than his eyes. She's desperate. Always has been. But Clara saw it. The faintest crack in Vanessa's mask. A flicker of doubt, of suspicion. You think I don't know? Clara whispered, her voice low but sharp enough to cut. You think I didn't hear the phone call, see the late-night texts? Vanessa, he told me the same lines he's telling you now. Word for word. Gasps echoed. Vanessa's hand slipped from Adrian's arm. Only for a second, but it was enough. Enough for every watching eye to catch it. Enough for Adrian's jaw to clench, his smile stretching too thin. Clara, he said through his teeth, still trying to maintain the performance. Enough. But Vanessa turned to him now, her voice quiet, tight. Is she lying? The question wasn't meant for Clara, it was meant for him. And in that moment the room shifted. Adrian wasn't the untouchable millionaire anymore. He was a man caught between two women, one holding his arm, the other holding his past. Clara's chest rose and fell, her heart pounding, but her gaze stayed steady. This was the moment she had waited for. The first fracture in his perfect facade. Adrian chuckled weakly, raising his hands as though the whole thing were a farce. Vanessa, darling, of course she's lying. Look at her. She's bitter, jealous. You're everything she wishes she still had. Vanessa forced another smile, but it didn't reach her eyes this time. The crowd saw it. Clara saw it. And Adrian, for the first time that night, looked uncertain, because once a smile cracked, it could never quite be repaired. Clara slid the envelope back against her chest, her pulse steady. She hadn't even opened it yet, but already the room was hers, and she knew this was only the beginning. The ballroom air had grown thick, heavy, like glass about to splinter under too much pressure. Clara's words lingered, Vanessa's smile fractured, and Adrian's laughter had turned hollow. But just as silence threatened to reclaim the room, a voice cut through, soft, trembling, but impossible to ignore. She's not lying. Heads turned, whispers rising like static. At the back of the ballroom, the young woman Clara had noticed earlier stepped into the light. Anna. Her steps were hesitant at first, the click of her heels almost lost against the marble. Yet with each stride, her chin lifted higher, her gaze sharpened. By the time she reached the edge of the crowd, her presence commanded the room. She wasn't dressed in wealth like the others. Her gown was elegant but modest, her jewelry understated. But it wasn't what she wore that held the crowd. It was the weight in her eyes. Clara's heart thudded. She had waited for this moment. held her silence until Anna herself was ready to break it. And now, as their eyes met briefly, Clara gave the faintest nod. Adrian's face drained of color just for a flicker, before he forced his trademark grin back into place. "And you are?" he asked, feigning casual interest. Another guest looking for a moment in the spotlight? Anna swallowed hard, but her voice steadied. "My name is Anna Hayes, and I'm your daughter." The room gasped as one. Glasses clinked against tables. Hands flew to mouths. Hand whispers erupted like wildfire. Vanessa's hand slipped from Adrian's arm entirely, her knuckles white against her champagne glass. Adrian laughed, sharp and brittle. "Daughter? That's absurd. You must be confused." He turned toward the crowd, gesturing dismissively. "Do you see what this is? Clara's little circus act, dragging in some stranger to spin tales. Pathetic, really. But his voice carried strain now, the edges too sharp. Anna didn't flinch. "You met my mother 23 years ago in Boston. You were still building your first company. You promised her everything, just like you promise every woman." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on louder. "And when she got pregnant, you vanished. She raised me alone. You sent money at first, then nothing." Clara's chest tightened. The crowd shifted uneasily, some whispering names, others calculating timelines. Adrian's jaw clenched. "This is outrageous. I don't know this girl." Anna stepped closer, her eyes burning into his. "Don't know me? Then how do you explain this?" She pulled a folded photograph from her clutch, old, creased but clear. Adrian, 2 decades younger, stood beside a smiling woman holding a newborn in her arms. The photograph passed through trembling hands in the front row, each guest staring before passing it on. By the time it circled back, the damage was done. Clara spoke then, her voice cutting clean through the chaos. "I knew about her, Adrian. I kept your secret, even when it destroyed me. But tonight it doesn't stay hidden." The ballroom fell to a hushed, breathless silence. Vanessa's voice cracked through it, sharp and venomous. "Is it true?" Adrian didn't answer. He only stared at Clara, then at Anna, as though the walls were closing in. His smirk was gone now, replaced by something raw. Fear. "Tell them," Anna demanded, her voice rising with years of pain. "Tell them who I am." His throat worked, but no words came. The crowd pressed closer, the weight of judgment hanging in the air. Adrian Locke, the untouchable millionaire, the man who controlled every narrative, suddenly looked small, cornered. Clara's hand brushed the envelope at her chest. For years she had thought the papers inside would be the end of him, but now she realized the truth was bigger than money, bigger than fraud. It was blood, family. Anna's final words sliced through him like a blade. "You built an empire, but you left me to starve. And now the empire falls," gasps echoed again. And the room erupted into chaos. Reporters clutching at phones, guests whispering, Vanessa's voice breaking as she demanded answers. Adrian stood frozen, his empire shattering not with a bang, but with the truth he could no longer bury. And Clara knew this was the crack that would bring the whole glass kingdom down. The ballroom roared with whispers and flashing cameras, but Clara's focus never left Adrian. His jaw was set tight, his eyes darting between Anna, Vanessa, and the circling guests like a predator cornered. Then, without warning, he stepped forward, seized Clara's arm, and hissed through his smile, "Enough." A word now. He didn't wait for her response. He dragged her through the murmuring crowd, every step disguised as a gentleman's escort, though his grip dug bruises into her skin. They pushed past waiters balancing trays, past stunned guests still clutching their champagne, and slipped into the corridor leading to the service area. The music and voices dulled behind them. The kitchen door swung shut, sealing them in a harsh white glow. Stainless steel counters stretched out, steam rising from pots abandoned by staff, too curious to remain hidden from the drama outside. Adrian released her arm with a shove. His smile was gone now. What remained was sharp, stripped bare, dangerous. "You stupid woman," he spat, his voice low and jagged. "You think you can humiliate me in my own house?" In front of them? Clara steadied her breath, forcing her trembling hands to grip the counter behind her. She had imagined this confrontation for years, but reality was sharper, colder. "You built it on lies," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "And tonight those lies are cracking. Everyone sees it." He stepped closer, the heat of his anger filling the sterile room. His eyes blazed, his mouth twisted. "You think you've won something. You think a bastard child and a few scraps of paper will destroy me? He leaned so close she could feel his breath against her cheek. If I go down, Clara, you burn with me. Her chest tightened, but she didn't move. She had lived too long under that shadow, too long letting his threats coil around her throat. Not tonight. Without a word, she slipped her phone from her purse, thumb brushing the screen beneath the fabric. The recording app blinked alive, hidden by her trembling hand. He didn't notice. He was too consumed by his own fury. You think you're clever? His voice grew quieter, deadlier. I could end you with a word. Every judge, every politician in that room owes me. And if I have to, I'll tell them about you, about the pills you took when the pressure got too much, about the nights you begged me not to leave. They'll see you as weak, unstable. Not a whistleblower. A hysterical woman who couldn't handle being left behind. The words struck deep. Old wounds reopened, the shame of nights she thought she wouldn't survive flooding back. But this time, instead of shrinking, she let the pain anchor her. Because now she knew the recording was capturing every word, every venomous syllable. You always underestimate me, she whispered, meeting his eyes. He sneered. Because you've never given me reason not to. Her pulse pounded. The phone warmed in her palm, a silent witness to years of manipulation condensed into one confession. She straightened, her voice low, steady. That ends tonight. For a moment, neither moved. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, the hum of a dishwasher filling the silence between them. Adrian's fists clenched at his sides. He looked ready to strike, but instead he stepped back, forcing the mask of control back onto his face. You don't have the guts, he muttered. You never did, but Clara didn't falter. She slipped the phone back into her purse, the recording still running, her eyes locked on his. Maybe once, she said, but not anymore. A shout echoed from the ballroom. Voices calling Adrian's name, reporters demanding answers, Vanessa's sharp tone cutting through the din. The walls of his empire were closing in, and he knew it. He turned toward the door, adjusting his cufflinks with a trembling hand, masking his panic with precision. This isn't over. Clara's voice followed him, quiet but searing. No, Adrian, it's just beginning. And as the kitchen door swung shut behind him, Clara pressed her hand against her purse, feeling the phone's silent weight. The knife of silence she had finally turned against him. The kitchen door slammed shut behind Adrian, leaving Clara alone in the sterile brightness, her pulse still racing from his words. She pressed her hand against the purse, feeling the phone warm against her skin. Its recording like a heartbeat of truth she had never dared to keep before. When she finally stepped back into the ballroom, the atmosphere had shifted. The chatter was louder, frantic, laced with fear and speculation. Guests clustered in tight circles, their eyes darting between Adrian, Vanessa, and Anna, who stood near the stage with her arms crossed tightly across her chest. And then the doors opened again. But this time, it wasn't another secret from Adrian's past. It was uniformed officers. The click of their boots against marble cut through the noise. A ripple of gasps spread across the room. Adrian Locke, one of them called, his voice firm, official, carrying over the orchestra's silence. Adrian straightened, his smirk already back in place. Officers, he said smoothly, spreading his arms. I assume there's been some mistake. Surely you didn't crash my engagement party for nothing. The crowd shifted uneasily. Cameras clicked from the corners, guests holding up their phones to capture the spectacle. Clara's breath caught. This was it, the moment when the years of silence either broke open or collapsed into dust. Her fingers closed around the phone inside her purse. She stepped forward, her shoes steady against the marble floor. There's no mistake, she said, her voice carrying with a clarity she hadn't known she possessed. Adrian turned, his mask cracking for just a second. Clara! She pulled the phone free, the recording still blinking on the screen. I have proof. His voice. His threats. His fraud. Her hands trembled, but her tone was unwavering. She extended the device toward the officer. The officer accepted it, slipping an earpiece in as the room watched in breathless silence. A few beats later, his jaw tightened. He nodded to his partner. Adrian's smirk faltered. Wait, you can't just— Yes, we can, the officer said. His voice was flat, certain. Mr. Locke, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and making criminal threats. Gasps erupted like shattering glass. Vanessa staggered back, her hand clutching the edge of a table for balance. Adrian? She whispered, her eyes wide. her perfect mask finally breaking. Adrian tried to laugh, but the sound cracked in his throat. "This is absurd. Clara, tell them. You know how emotional you get, how you twist things." But Clara didn't answer. She only stood there, her face calm, her purse dangling loosely now that it was empty of secrets. The officers moved swiftly, pulling Adrian's hands behind his back. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the ballroom, and just like that, the empire he had built on charm and glass came crashing down in front of chandeliers and frozen smiles. The guests stood in stunned silence, their champagne glasses still half raised, their laughter choked silent. The orchestra lowered their bows. Vanessa's mascara ran as tears streaked her flawless face. Adrian thrashed once, his voice raw now, stripped of elegance. "You'll regret this, Clara. You think you've won. You'll regret this." But his words no longer carried power. They were just noise, bouncing against walls that no longer belonged to him. Clara didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply watched as they dragged him through the doors, his tuxedo rumpled, his cufflinks glinting like shackles under the ballroom lights. When the doors closed again, silence settled like dust. All eyes turned to her, but she felt nothing of their stares. No triumph, no vindication, only a hollow weight, as though victory had cost her everything she once was. Slowly she turned away. Her heels clicked against the marble steady, echoing in the vastness of the hall. Past Vanessa's tears, past Anna's trembling shoulders, past the guests who whispered her name now with awe instead of pity. She walked out of the ballroom, through the grand double doors and into the night. The cold air hit her face, sharp and clean, carrying none of the perfume, champagne or lies that lingered inside. For the first time in years, the silence around her felt like freedom. But freedom, Clara realized, was not the same as peace. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and stepped into the darkness, her figure swallowed by the city lights. Behind her, the music of Adrian Locke's empire had stopped. Ahead only the unknown waited. The night after the arrest stretched endlessly, quiet in a way Clara hadn't felt in years. No chandeliers, no murmurs hidden in champagne glasses. No Adrian. Just the faint hum of her old refrigerator and the ticking of a wall clock in her small apartment. She sat at the worn kitchen table, her purse resting on the chair beside her. The envelope lay open now, its papers spread across the wood like fragments of a life she'd been forced to carry alone. Offshore accounts, transfers, his signature bold and arrogant. She traced the ink with her finger, not out of triumph but of grief. Proof had saved her tonight, yes, but proof had cost her years. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number saved only hours earlier. "Can I come by?" Clara hesitated, then typed back, "Yes." 20 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Clara opened it to find Anna standing there, shoulders hunched beneath a borrowed coat, her eyes still rimmed red from the ballroom. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Clara stepped aside and Anna entered. The apartment was small, bare compared to the opulence of the gala, but Anna didn't seem to mind. She sat at the table, staring at the papers still scattered across it. "Does it ever stop?" Anna asked finally, her voice low. Clara sat across from her. "What? The feeling that he's still here? Even when he's gone?" Clara's throat tightened. She looked at Anna, the girl who had grown up with half-truths and absence, carrying wounds that mirrored her own. "No," she said honestly, "it doesn't stop. But it changes. One day it won't control you. It'll just remind you." Anna nodded, her jaw trembling. She looked down at her hands. "I hated him, but part of me still wanted him to see me, just once." Clara reached across the table, placing her hand over Anna's. "That's the part he couldn't kill. The part that wanted love. Don't ever hate yourself for that." The silence between them was softer than it had been in years, not suffocating but fragile, like something new. Clara leaned back, exhaling. "People will tell us this is victory," she murmured. "That exposing him means we won. But truth isn't about winning. It's about surviving it." Anna's eyes met hers, wet but steady. "And now?" Clara glanced at the papers one last time before gathering them into a neat stack. "Now we rebuild, scar by scar." They sat together in that tiny kitchen, two women bound not by Adrian's lies anymore, but by the cost of uncovering them. Outside, the city lights blinked in the distance, indifferent to their quiet moment. Clara closed her eyes briefly, hearing only the hum of the fridge, the steady tick of the clock. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind Adrian had forced on her, but the kind she had chosen. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was hers. Clara sat in the dim light of her kitchen, her hand still resting over Anna's. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside everything was quiet. The man who once controlled her silence was gone, and in his place only the weight of truth remained. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply breathed, scarred, hollow, but free, because survival wasn't triumph. Survival was enough. If you believe no lie can last forever, comment "Truth always wins" below. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that power can hide betrayal, but it can never bury justice.